Jason Phillis had spent weeks pretending Laura Miles meant nothing to him. Then the moment her sister came back to reclaim the life she abandoned, he realized the one woman he couldn't afford to lose was the woman they had all treated like a stand-in. And by the time Laura decided to walk away, Jason understood something terrifying. If he stayed silent now, he wouldn't just lose his wife. He would lose the only woman he had ever truly chosen. The crisis came on a Tuesday. Jason took a call during breakfast and went so still, Laura knew immediately something was wrong. He ended the call without finishing his coffee. "There's an issue at Halden," he said, already reaching for his jacket. Halden Tech was one of the Phillies Group's newer acquisitions, in a software firm Jason's company had absorbed 6 months earlier to broaden its international reach. Laura had read about it. Ambitious, expensive, not fully integrated. "What kind of issue?" she asked. He hesitated, which meant serious. "Internal data leak, possibly deliberate. The board is meeting in an hour." Laura put her cup down. "Your compliance team? Already involved. Your communications lead? Also involved. And are they coordinating or just creating separate disasters?" Jason looked at her sharply. Laura stood and crossed to the kitchen island, where his tablet lay unlocked beside a legal pad. One glance at the names on the emergency call sheet told her everything she needed to know. Too many executives. Too many lawyers. Not enough operational control. She looked up. "You don't need 8 voices in that room. Actually, you need 3. One for liability, one for facts, one for response." Jason didn't move. "You're centralizing too late," she continued. "If this becomes a leadership panic, the leak won't be your biggest problem. The market will smell confusion before lunch." He studied her. "And your solution?" Laura met him step for step. "Separate the internal investigation from external messaging. Freeze any executive who wants to speculate. Appoint one point person who actually understands the acquisition chain, and stop treating this like a press issue before you know whether it's a sabotage issue." There was a beat. Then Jason said, "Get your coat." She blinked. "Excuse me? You clearly have opinions." "I'm not going to your board meeting." "No, you're coming to the office." Laura crossed her arms. "As what, exactly?" Jason's gaze flicked over her, no wait, maddeningly calm. "The woman who just diagnosed my team's mistakes in under 30 seconds. That should have annoyed her. Instead, against her better judgment, it thrilled something in her she had been starving for since the wedding. Usefulness, competence, being seen for the thing she had built. 40 minutes later, Laura stood in a glass conference room 3 floors below the Phyllis executive suite, while Jason's senior people talked over one another in escalating tones. By the end of the first 15 minutes, she understood why he had brought her. Not because he trusted her, because he needed someone in the room who didn't fear him. When the head of communications launched into a polished but empty proposal about proactive framing, Laura cut in. "If you issue that statement now, you'll confirm a breach before you know the scale." The room went quiet. One executive frowned. "And you are?" Jason didn't look up from the file in front of him. "The only person here who has said something useful in 10 minutes. Continue, Laura." A strange energy moved through her then. Not confidence, that had never left. Permission. She stepped to the screen, reorganized the response timeline, cut half the talking points, and asked 2 questions nobody else had thought to ask. Who had access before the acquisition, and who had recently lost authority after it? By noon, the issue was narrowed to a former systems manager with retained credentials and a pending lawsuit. By 3, the board had stopped panicking. By 6, the company had a contained response strategy instead of a public meltdown. Yet Jason said almost nothing through all of it. That silence unnerved Laura more than praise would have. They rode home after dark. The city rolled by below them, washed in rain and reflected neon. Finally, Jason asked, "Why didn't you mention this background before?" Laura turned from the window. "My background? Strategic crisis management, merger integration, regulatory containment." A faint smile touched her mouth. "You mean my career?" He ignored that. "You let my team stumble around while you apparently knew exactly what they were doing wrong." She held his gaze. "You didn't ask." That answer did something to him. She saw it clearly. Not anger. Not exactly. Humility. He looked away first. Later that night, Laura stepped into the library and found a folder waiting on the desk. Her name was written across the front in Jason's precise handwriting. Inside were printouts, articles, deal summaries, a profile from a business journal, her speaking engagement from last spring, her firm bio, notes in the margin. He had looked into her, not as the wrong bride, as Laura. She stood there with the folder open in her hands and felt an emotion she did not want to name. At 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, she walked into the kitchen for water and found him there, barefoot, sleeves rolled, one lamp on. He looked up. Neither of them seemed surprised. Jason leaned against the counter. I read your market expansion strategy from the Lagos conference. Laura stilled. That wasn't public. No, it wasn't. She set the glass down. You had my files pulled. Yes. That's invasive. Yes. She should have been offended. And instead she asked, and? Jason's voice lowered. And I think you gave up more than anyone in your family understood. The truth of it struck harder because it came from him. Laura looked down. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Jason said, Why didn't you tell me who you were? She laughed quietly, sadder than she meant it to sound. I did. Nobody was asking the right question. His gaze held hers. What question was that? Not who are you married to? Not why are you here? Not what happened at the altar. Who were you before any of this? Laura felt something in her chest shift dangerously. So she said the safest version. The question was never who I was. It was whether anyone cared. Jason went very still. He crossed the kitchen slowly until he was standing in front of her. And close enough that she could smell rain on his shirt and the sharp, clean note of whatever soap he used. Close enough that every sensible instinct she had started ringing alarms. When you look at me, he said quietly, do you still think I don't care? Laura's breath caught. This was the moment a weaker woman might have stepped into, might have mistaken awakening for trust, attention for safety. But Laura had already learned what happened when she moved too early towards someone else's need. So she lifted her chin and said almost softly, I think you're only beginning to understand what it would cost you if you did. Then she walked out and left him standing alone in the light. Rose came back on a Sunday, not privately, not shamefully, publicly. She appeared at a charity luncheon their mother hosted every spring. Honey entering late in cream silk and diamonds as if she had merely stepped out for air and not detonated half the city's gossip industry on her way out. Every head turned. Laura, seated 2 tables from the stage, felt the room tighten like a wire. Their mother rose too quickly, relief and panic wrestling openly across her face. Their father, thinner now and slower, stayed seated but looked as if someone had shoved him back in time. Rose smiled with exquisite sadness. The performance was flawless. By dessert, she had already let 3 people see her cry. By coffee, she had apologized vaguely to anyone important enough to repeat it elsewhere. By the time the event ended, the narrative had begun reshaping itself exactly as Laura feared it would. Rose had been overwhelmed. Rose had made a mistake. Rose had suffered too. And of course, beneath all that polished repentance, the more poisonous version moved quietly from mouth to mouth. The temporary arrangement could now be corrected. That evening, Rose requested to see Laura alone. Laura almost refused. Instead, she met her in the conservatory of their parents' estate, where the late sun filtered through glass and warmed the stone floor in pale strips. Rose stood among the orchids, hands clasped, every inch the grieving daughter returned home. You look well, Rose said. Laura closed the door behind her. You don't. Rose gave a small smile. Still sharp. Still dishonest. The smile vanished. For a moment, the polished mask slipped, and the old sibling face returned. Tired, frustrated, slightly mean. I came to apologize. No, you came to assess. Rose's jaw tightened. You think so little of me. Laura almost laughed. You traded me for time and called it love. I was desperate. You were selfish. Rose looked down, then back up, tears already forming. I never thought it would go this far. Laura stared at her. That is not a defense. Rose's tears fell beautifully, even now. That marriage was supposed to be temporary. There it was, the truth beneath the performance. Laura felt herself go cold in a way she hadn't before. Not fiery anger, not betrayal, something cleaner. Final. You knew this was always temporary, Rose said, voice barely above a whisper. You were just the stand-in. For a second, the words landed so precisely that Laura could only stand there and feel them. Stand in, as if her life were a placeholder, as if her body at that altar, her name in those papers, her career left hanging by one impossible decision, it had all been part of a manageable family inconvenience. Laura did not cry. That seemed to unsettle Rose more than tears would have. Instead, Laura said very calmly, Do you know what the difference is between us? Rose swallowed but said nothing. When I loved you, I never once asked what it would cost you first. Rose's face broke then, but Laura no longer trusted anything it did. She turned to leave. Rose's voice stopped her at the door. You think he'll choose you? Laura didn't turn back. This was never about being chosen. But that night, alone in her suite, she sat on the edge of the bed with that sentence in her chest and knew it was no longer fully true. Because somewhere between the investigation, the midnight conversations, the quiet regard in his eyes, and the way he had begun to say her name like it belonged to a person instead of a problem, something dangerous had happened. She had begun to want, not the marriage, not the wealth, not the rescue, Jason, and wanting him made her vulnerable in a way humiliation never had. The next blows came fast. A partner at Laura's firm called to check in and gently asked whether she planned to return at all. A client postponed a contract review. An invitation to speak at an industry forum was quietly withdrawn. Rose hadn't just returned. The family had begun cleaning up, and Laura was the stain they intended to remove. When Jason came home that evening, he found her standing in the study with 3 printed emails on the desk. He took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" Laura handed him the papers. He read quickly. Too quickly. By the 3rd page, something dangerous moved beneath his calm. They contacted your firm. My mother knows half the board socially. Jason looked up. Rose? Laura let out a small breath. I don't know. Does it matter? Yes, his expression said. To him, it mattered very much. But Laura was past outrage. That's not the point, she said. What is the point? She met his gaze. The point is, this ends now. His eyes sharpened. What does that mean? It means they want the problem removed, and I am not staying here long enough to become a war they fight through me. Jason's face closed. You're leaving. Laura almost smiled at how much colder the room felt when he said it. I'm untangling myself. From them? From all of it? His jaw tightened. You made that decision alone. She stared at him. Jason, the first major decision in this marriage was made without either of us. I'm simply trying to reclaim one. Something flashed across his face then. Hurt, maybe, or pride taking damage where it had no right to. You think walking away is power? No, Laura said quietly. I think it's self-respect. He stepped closer. And what about what I want? The question hung between them, bare, unarmored. Laura felt her heart misfire once, hard, but she had come too far to build her future on a half-confession. So she said the hardest thing. Then for once, Jason, you'll have to say it before it's too late. She left him there because if she had stayed 1 second longer, she might have accepted less than the truth, and she was done surviving on less. The Phillies Foundation Gala was one of those events the city treated like weather. Well, you didn't ask whether people were going. You assumed they would be there. Politicians, investors, editors, board members, family friends, rivals pretending to toast one another. Every person who had watched the wedding day unfold, every person who had turned it into rumor, every person who had quietly waited to see which woman Jason Phillis would eventually stand beside. Laura hadn't planned to attend. Then a black box arrived that morning. Inside was a gown. Midnight blue. Understated. Perfect. And beneath it, a handwritten note. You should hear this in the room. No signature. None needed. Laura stared at the card for a long time. She almost tore it in half. Instead, she dressed. Not because she expected anything, because she had spent too many weeks being spoken about in rooms she was absent from. Tonight, she would be present. The ballroom glittered. Conversation softened when she entered, then resumed in careful waves. She felt the stare of recognition travel ahead of her. Some curious, some sympathetic, some hungry. Rose was already there. Of course she was. She stood beside their mother in silver, breathtaking and strategic, as if reclaiming center stage were her birthright. When Rose saw Laura, surprise flickered first, then irritation, then something closer to unease. Good, Laura thought. Let her. Jason was nowhere in sight. By 9:15, the speeches began. Board acknowledgments, foundation milestones, a scholarship announcement. Laura listened to almost none of it. She had come prepared to leave before the final toast, not out of defeat, out of completion. She had spent the day signing documents to re-enter her firm under a new advisory structure independent of the family's influence. She had spoken to a recruiter in London. She had looked at apartments. Her life, bruised as it was, had begun moving again. She would not stand frozen in a man's silence forever. Then Jason took the stage. The room changed the moment he stepped behind the podium. He wore black again, severe, tailored, impossible to ignore. But the stillness he carried tonight was not coldness. It was decision. He began with the foundation. Thanked donors, mentioned expansion plans, acknowledged the year's grant recipients. Then he set the prepared remarks aside. The faint rustle of paper sounded louder than it should have. Laura went still. Jason looked out over the room, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. Most of you came tonight expecting numbers. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the audience. You will still get them, he said. But first there is a matter I intend to correct publicly, because it should never have been left to private rumor. The ballroom froze. Laura felt, rather than saw, her mother straighten. Rose's hand tightened around her glass. Jason continued. Months ago, on my wedding day, a deception took place. Many of you know that. Fewer of you know the truth of it. No one moved. No one breathed loudly enough to be noticed. The woman originally expected at that ceremony chose not to appear. Rather than tell the truth, members of the Miles family substituted another in her place without my knowledge. Across the room, Rose's face drained of color. Their mother's lips parted in horror. My Jason did not look at either of them. He kept his eyes on the crowd. That substitution was not an act of love. It was not an accident of confusion. It was cowardice wrapped in family strategy. The words landed like glass. A murmur stirred, then died instantly when he went on. The woman who stood at that altar did not orchestrate the lie. She was pressured into it, used by people who trusted her loyalty more than they respected her freedom. Laura felt her throat tighten. Jason turned then, not to the front tables, not to Rose, to the back half of the room, to her. And for the first time all night, his composure broke just enough to let the truth through. Laura. Her name crossed the ballroom and changed it. People turned. The path between them opened slowly, as if the room itself understood it had no right to remain in the way. Laura did not move. Jason stepped away from the podium. Someone behind her whispered, "Oh my God!" He kept walking. I should have said this sooner, he said, his voice carrying in the stunned quiet. I should have said it before the speculation, before the damage, before people who had already taken too much from you were allowed to take more. He stopped a few feet in front of her. Up close, she could see it then. Not confidence, not performance. Risk, real and absolute. The kind he had spent his whole life avoiding unless he could control the outcome. Not tonight. Jason looked at her as if the room had fallen away. They called you temporary, he said. A stand-in, a solution, a correction waiting to happen. Across the ballroom, Rose closed her eyes. Jason did not spare her a glance. No, they were wrong. Laura's heart pounded so hard it almost hurt. Because what I saw that day was not a replacement, he said. I saw the only honest person left in a room built on appearances. No one dared interrupt. I saw a woman who walked into humiliation and carried herself with more dignity than the people who put her there. I saw someone who asked nothing from me while everyone around us asked for access, protection, status, forgiveness. His voice lowered, but somehow reached farther. I saw you. Laura's eyes burned. She hated that, hated the vulnerability of it in public, and yet she could not look away. Jason took one step closer. This marriage may have begun as a lie, he said, but what I feel for you did not. A sound moved through the room, a collective intake of breath. He kept going. No retreat now. I respect you. I trust you, and whether you choose to keep my name or walk away from it entirely, there is one truth I will not allow anyone here to rewrite. He paused. Then he said clearly, with no shelter left between him and consequence, you were never the wrong bride. You were the woman I should have been standing beside from the start. Laura stood completely still. It was everything she had demanded without asking. Everything he had withheld until he could no longer bear the cost of silence. Public, unequivocal, irreversible. And still, he did one more thing. He offered her a choice. Not with force, with openness. He held out his hand. The ballroom waited. Her mother looked shattered. Her father looked old enough to finally understand what he had spent. Rose looked like someone watching a story choose another ending in real time. Laura looked at Jason. At the hand extended not in ownership, but invitation. At the man who had finally chosen without calculation. And in that suspended second, she thought of the altar, of the veil lifting, of terror, of silence, of every moment since. This time the room would not decide what happened next. She would. Laura stepped forward, placed her hand in his, and the relief that crossed Jason's face was so raw, so unguarded, that for the first time all night, she smiled. Small, real. His fingers closed around hers. He turned with her to face the room, but Laura did not let the moment belong only to him. She lifted her chin and met the stares head-on. Let them see, not the scandal, not the substitute, not the woman who had been used, the woman who remained. Jason's thumb brushed once across her knuckles. Then Laura said, not calm and clear enough for the nearest tables to hear. I was never standing in for anyone. The words moved outward in a hush. Jason looked down at her, something almost like wonder in his expression. No, he said, you weren't. And just like that, the humiliation that had been planned for her found nowhere left to live, because shame survives in secrecy, in silence, in the stories other people tell about you before you get the chance to tell your own. But Laura stood in the center of the room that had once been prepared to swallow her whole, and beside her stood the man who now understood exactly what it meant to choose. Not the easier woman, not the expected one. Her, completely, publicly, without apology. Later the headlines would say many things. Phyllis Air exposes wedding deception at foundation. Gala socialite sister's altar exit leads to public reckoning. Laura Miles no longer in the shadow. But none of those headlines would capture the real ending. The real ending was quieter. It was Laura standing by the penthouse window just after midnight, heels off, city below her, while Jason came to stand beside her with 2 glasses of water because he knew champagne was the last thing either of them needed. It was him saying, I meant every word, and Laura answering, I know. It was the silence after that, no longer feeling like distance. It was the beginning of something neither of them had planned, and both of them had earned. The bride swap had been meant to humiliate her. Instead, it revealed everyone. The cowardice, the cruelty, the cost of being the dependable one in a family that mistook love for obligation. And in the end, when all the masks came off, when all the calculations failed, when the room waited to see which woman Jason Phillis would choose, he chose the one they had overlooked, the one who never begged, the one who endured, the one who had walked into the fire and come out with her dignity intact. He chose Laura, and this time she chose too.